Hi there, and welcome to our talk about CBPR Plus migration and what is going to happen in November and what are your options right now if you do not have a full solution. My name is Paul Ruskin. I'm the Director of Business Development at Trace Financial, and I'm joined by Kjeld, my good friend, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself if that's okay, Kjeld.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Kjeld Herreman. I am the Head of Strategy Advisory at RedCompass Labs. We're a consulting firm specialized in, among other things, ISO 20022 and payments.
I know, it's a talk about ISO 20022. Who would have thought this? But did you know that it's going live in November? Because apparently not many people do.
I heard some rumors, yeah. So, obviously being based in Belgium, in Europe, we were a little bit ahead of the curve with, Target 2 actually announcing it well before Swift. Mm-hmm. But now the deadline seems to be approaching quickly, and although there are some discussions, it looks like it's going to be
Don't say that. It's going live in November. Please don't say there's a delay.
It's going live in November.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. No, but the point is that I'm very surprised still that, my line of work, what I do, I'm still finding fairly big players coming to me saying, we're not quite ready yet. And I know we've had, waves vaguely at the world, a lot of different issues in the last few years, why things have been pushed. But now people are now knuckling down and thinking, right, I've got to get something live. Now, if you are a player in this industry, you're on the Swift network, and you have done nothing at the moment, is it still possible to be MX compliant by November?
So if you haven't done anything today, you can still be compliant. However, there will be limitations. You need to be dealing with some type of translation solution. We can look at the various types of solutions that are possible. To migrate your core payments engine towards a new solution is going to be very tough, and especially if we consider everything that we need to do regarding testing, because it's not just implementing it, but you need to make sure that your solution is watertight, and that it's watertight downstream and upstream as well. We need to think about channels, we need to think about everything. So right now, yes, you can be compliant, but you're going to be using some type of minimal translation tool that comes with its limitations. So you've talked to a few of these banks already who really have limitations when it comes to their throughputs. What are some of the barriers that you're encountering?
At the moment, it's protecting legacy systems. So at the moment, as a player in the Swift network, you are already MT compliant. You're already taking the MT messages. That's not the problem. I have been requesting on a number of occasions this year and definitely last year as well, I'm not going to get everything MX compliant. My back office is not going to be MX compliant. My payment system's not going to be MX compliant. I need to get a full payment system that's going to take a year to implement at the very minimum. So what I need to do is somehow get a translation service that protects these legacy systems. So if I do receive an MX, convert it into MT, and then everyone's happy. And then I'll deal with the problem a bit later. So it's almost like a plaster. But we had a talk last year about this for Payments Canada, and I'm going to bring this up again because it was such an excellent point, because this is sometimes I think I sort of miss as well, is how rich this data is, and you should be almost mining it, for want of a better word. That can't be possible, I guess, this November, but you should probably look towards next year, something like that.
No, absolutely. So at some point you need to migrate your systems towards a proper solution, because as you said, the translation solution, it's a temporary band-aid that you can use to fix the bleeding, but it's not something that you can use in the long run. And I think you really come to the core of it when you say protecting legacy systems. Yeah. And legacy systems are just a problem in banking, because let's face it, these things are mainframe systems that were developed in the 80s by John, who's since retired, and no one has a clue what it does. So you kind of have this black box sitting at the core of your bank. You have no idea what it does, and above all, you can't touch it or change it at all because, don't break it.
Please don't.
But that's not sustainable. At some point, you need to go towards something a little bit more modern where you can have this rich data, because there's so much that you can do with it. Again, MT messaging was developed in the 80s at the time that John was developing this mainframe system, right? So it had to be short, it had to be concise. I remember this was, back in the days when you could download a song on Napster, and you launched the download in the evening and it was ready by the next
Tuesday?
morning.
Okay,
We don't have those limitations anymore. So we have rich data now. We'll have to see when corporates and the customers actually start adapting it. But it opens a lot of possibilities. When we look at rich data as well, so as of November 2022, there's nothing immediately burning to be able to use that. However, we see in a lot of different jurisdictions, both in the UK, in the US, in Europe, that we're going to go towards structured addresses. And even if we look at Europe now, right? Target 2, structured addresses are required for ultimate debtor, for ultimate creditor, which are new data elements. And if you're using translation, you're always going to have issues when you're going from unstructured to structured. Is that something that you've come across as well?
At the moment, the CBPR Plus regulations are there's a repeating field in the address line. So you've got all these beautiful postcode, building name, bank name, everything's in there. But people aren't ready. So it's just going into this repeating group, and they're just like, every address you get from MT 4 times 35, chuck it in there. And it's going to be that switch between run the bank to change the bank. At the moment, it's just run the bank. Let's get this through November. But next year, you should really be looking at changing the bank and going, right, we need to start, as you said, mining this, getting this information, because it is vital, and it's going to be really interesting for banks to be able to. You made a great point. I keep harking back to last year, but the point you made last year is you can then see what branches are doing most of your traffic. Where are these coming from? At the moment, it's just, I guess it's the UK, I guess it's Belgium, I guess it's the States. So it is going to be very interesting. At the moment, as we've said, you've got a translation service. It's not really, it's going to fix your problem for November. What are the different options? Swift are definitely offering that translation service. So can you give some pros and cons about what that could entail for a bank?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at translation services, we have, I guess, 3 different flavors that exist. The first one, as you know quite well with Trace Financial, is kind of something that's sitting in premise. And one of the big advantages with a solution like that is that you can integrate it with other systems. You can have it talk to other databases. You can do a little bit more with it than if it's something hosted by Swift. So I guess that's the most intense one to deploy. It requires the greatest amount of investment. However, it has the greatest amount of flexibility. The other ones are Swift network-based translation services, which first of all have the limitations that they can only go from MX to MT. They never go from MT to MX, so always MX to MT. And you can't really adapt them as well. Within Swift, there's 2 different types that exist. One is inflow translation that's available for all MX traffic. So what Swift will do is if you get in an MX payment message, so that can be your PAX 8 or your PAX 9, for example, you get those in, and they will then create a translation of that message, and they will embed that in the MX message that they're sending. Your Alliance gateway or your Alliance product, or maybe even your service bureau, can then split that message up into its components, into an MX component, into an MT component, and then you can decide yourself what goes where. So that's quite easy, right?
And that's Fin Plus.
So yes, you receive it in over Fin Plus, and then you decide internally, what goes where.
Yes.
So that's one possible solution. Again, the drawback there is, let's say, you say my compliance screening solution, I want that to receive MX, and my payments engine, I want that to receive MT. If we look at payments processing in a bank today, it's very serial, right? It needs to go through your compliance, and then, so how do you adapt your systems to be able to do these things in parallel, right? It's
speed, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Absolutely. So that's one other option. The final one is Swift's Transaction Manager. And Transaction Manager isn't available for all payments. In fact, Transaction Manager is only available for ISO-originated transactions, at least in the build-up phase. And even within that subgroup of ISO-originated transactions, they'll start with only rich ones. And then even within that group, it'll start with only ones within a certain UETR range. So Swift can actually build up the traffic and make sure that, we're not taking any undue risks to the financial system. But Transaction Manager has the added advantage that it keeps also the audit trail.
Right.
And it maintains data integrity, which is great.
Yeah.
It makes sure that we do away with problems. For example, the correspondent bank who's going to be truncating data.
Sure.
And then further down the line, we can still retrieve that through Transaction Manager, which is an advantage to fighting financial crime and to make sure that we have traceability of payments. On the other side, for a bank, it can be a challenge because we can be getting additional data in from another source, right? Yeah. I can be getting in an MX message or an MT message over a clearinghouse,
yeah.
But I might also need to check in the Transaction Manager. Is there any additional information available about that payment that I need to screen? So yeah, a lot of different solutions that are out there. Not all of them apply all the time, but
that's the key point, because the solutions, there's not just this solution will fit every single requirement. And there are some situations where, for example, what I promote, I sometimes think, well, actually, this might not be the best, and I will tell the customer that. But you do need to think of something. If somebody comes to us and we demo, etc., we talk to them, and so I honestly don't care if you buy us, but you do need to get something. I would not be doing this in-house. I would not have somebody writing code to write these mappings and then maintain them, because that, I think, is the key. Maintaining what you've currently got going live in November, as you've mentioned, Target 2, Euro 1, chips, chaps, maps, whatever you want to call it, lots of different places. They're just all going to start spreading, and you get different versions of MX messages. And it's like, if you're doing this in-house, I believe you are setting yourself up for a much bigger role as it snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. I don't know what you think about that.
Absolutely. So doing it in-house can be a challenge. Why? Because as you mentioned, especially for larger banks who have a lot of branches, different branches might operate in different ways, different clearings, different types of flows. So doing it in-house can be quite challenging, especially when there are good solutions already available that allow you to kind of easily plug and play translations. I think the key thing, besides looking at a translation solution, that you need to do as a bank, if you haven't started on your migration journey yet, is really looking at testing.
Yes.
And that's, so on one side, you need to be able to protect your legacy systems from these MX messages and make sure that you're able to process them. But you need to be able to process them correctly. And one size fits all doesn't work when it comes to testing, as it doesn't work with translation either, right? And that's why you need to look at your production data. You need to think about, okay, what type of payments am I processing? What are the little quirks and features?
The edge cases, isn't it,
absolutely.
as well? Yeah.
What are the edge cases? How are my customers behaving? Because let's face it, you tell a customer these are the specifications for a payment message. They never will respect them and will always tweak them and do unexpected things. So you can look at your production data and try to anticipate those things that kind of fall outside of the traditional spectrum.
And I've always been of the, I'm getting quite old now, but looking at 3-month parallel testing. And something like CBPR Plus in November, I would look at 3-month parallel testing, and that time is getting shorter and shorter, I would say.
Absolutely. So then you need to start thinking about automated testing. You need to think about
unit tests.
Working, trying to get external people on board as quickly as possible if you need them for testing. And that's, I think, one of the other challenges that the industry is facing, right? Is that we're both working in the payments industry. We're doing very long hours, and I don't think the end of those long hours is in sight in the near future.
Holidays cancelled.
Holidays cancelled. So yeah, it's as we get closer to that deadline, you're not only penalizing yourself in terms of how much time do I have to not only find a solution testing, but also what external resources will be available to me to assist me in that testing. Because it's not just, I'm sitting here as consultant, so of course I'm going to say, book your consultants as soon as possible. But I think on solution,
I actually disagree. Well. I actually think they should be, when people come to me looking at technology solutions such as ours, when we talk about it, it's like, you probably need to get a consultant as well. I don't know all of your edge cases. I am not an expert in payments on your particular bank. You will need somebody's very, not detailed, but somebody, and I'm going to promote your company because it's a very good one, and that's why we're talking, and you're very good, is that you need someone like you. Please parachute Kjeld in, and he will tell you exactly what you need as these edge cases, what you have missed. I can tell you technology-wise, but from the business side, I believe it goes hand in hand. You need technology and you need business. I can't go and solve every one of your problems.
Absolutely.
But you need those two married up. So yes, I'm absolutely going to punt you as much as I can because you're very good. So following on from having that business and technology, and you've mentioned edge cases, what sort of type of edge cases can you think of that could be a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're thinking about edge cases, there's a couple of things we should be looking at, right? One is, first of all, anything that's outside of the body of the message. So what we see is that, we're in a world where STP is everything. Straight through processing is everything. Yeah. And we see banks that have heavily invested in automating all types of exceptions.
Right.
And some of that is actually built around things in header block 1, header block 2. And when you're translating, a lot of times the translation solutions are kind of doing away with that or recreating it. Swift is just an example of that. If you have an embedded MT, they're kind of just creating something in those header blocks. So if you're reliant on header blocks, that's one of the edge cases that you need to look at closely. Another thing that you need to take into account is any flows that you're processing that are payments on behalf of or collections on behalf of. Anything where we can deal with ultimate debtor, ultimate creditor. And we see more and more of those payments coming through. Why? Because we have new actors. So, we're moving away from a world where we only have banks. Now we have electronic money institutions, PSPs. Think of, for example, a Wise who's going to be doing payments on behalf of. And if you don't look at that ultimate debtor or ultimate creditor data, you might be missing some important information about who's doing payments. You might be missing money laundering. Right. You might be missing sanctions. So that's another important edge case to look at. And
that is actually becoming more prevalent in our line when I talk to customers. Is we need to make a call out to AML KYC. 5-10 years ago, everything was done in house, and I think it's a rapidly growing area, and it's a very interesting area. But I always think that also maybe slow down the payment because you also have to make these extra outside calls, etc. But it has to be done. You know? And I'm not saying it shouldn't be, obviously, but those extra parts maybe also are muddying the waters when it comes to November and having to think, right, I'm just processing a payment. Actually, no, I've got to figure out who I've got to, as you said, ultimate creditor. Am I allowed to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we need to think about is, first of all, filtering.
Yeah.
How can we filter it? How can we make sure that our sanction screening solutions are correct? Second thing is you need to process the payment. So that's kind of your payment engine / your accounting system, kind of what we think about when we think about payments. But then we need to think further downstream as well. What happens in terms of reporting?
Yeah.
Am I generating the correct reporting for my customers? Is that reporting what my customers is expecting to send? Do I have corporate customers who are expecting ISO reporting, right? Because there could potentially be extended remittance information, ultimate debtor, ultimate creditor information that's going to help them reconcile. So we need to think about customer expectations. So besides our file-based reporting channels, we of course also have our online channels. How are we going to adapt our online channels when it either comes to reporting or also payment initiation, right? Because we need new data elements to be able to initiate payments, or it's possible to introduce them. So how can we adapt our channels? So a lot of times, when we're thinking about doing a last-minute migration, you can attack part of the problem. You can solve kind of the payments processing and perhaps the sanction screening. But if you haven't started now by looking at your channels and your customer experience, and it's not going to be brilliant. What's that going to translate to? That could translate to customer attrition. So if we're going to build a business case to do it properly, or to rip the Band-Aid off and try to start thinking about a proper new way of processing the payment. So we need to look at customer attrition, customer expectations, but we also need to think about a reduction in STP rates when we have these solutions that are based on translation. STP is going to drop. It's just, there's no way of getting around it, especially in the beginning. So you need to make sure that you have capacity to deal with that increased number of repairs or increased number of sanctions hits. And you need to make sure that you can bring that down very quickly. Yeah. And again, that's why at RedCompass, we really believe in testing with production data, right? To be able to identify these edge cases and to minimize the impact on STP. And that's one of the big advantages, because we've talked a lot about ISO 20022 being rich and fantastic and it's going to solve all the world's problems. That's one of the areas where it can actually be very helpful. By having this rich structured data, we can avoid false positives. We can avoid misinterpretation. We can avoid all those type of situations. So if you make a proper investment, it's going to come down. But if you haven't done it yet, you don't have time for that. And you need to think about it on one side. What am I going to do to be ready for November 2022? And there we're looking at translation and testing. And on the other side, okay, what am I going to do to think about my long-term strategy? What are the risks associated to, because you need to do that now as well. If you look at it, 2-3 years down the line, you're going to come to your board of directors and say, we've gotten by so far, but we need new payment engine. We need new payment engine. These short-term solutions can very quickly turn into long-term solutions if they aren't immediately identified as, okay, this is an immediate response and this is the long-term approach that we have. So I think the two really need to go hand in hand.
So to summarize what we've discussed is that if somebody had come to me or come to you with, I'm not ready for November, please help me, it's doable. Definitely doable. It's not, I hate using the word plaster, it will get where you need to go, but it's not, we're going to throw this away in 2 years. That is not what we do, and it's definitely not what you do as well. It is a case of, you can use the pre-built libraries, it will translate your messages, we can work around exception handling, we can work around replays, we can work around truncation, etc. All of those issues, you can get that still, even when you watch this video, you can still be ready for November. But then I guess the harder work then begins when they say, right, what should we do with this data? Let's not just do the bare minimum. And you've got this coexistence period. Swift MT's not being turned off for another 3 years, 4 years, or 3 years, I think. Say 3. But you've now got 3 years to start working on this. So from my perspective, even the Band-Aid, the plaster solution November can be a long-term solution. Don't just throw something in, cross your fingers, and then hope when 3 years are up, it will still work, because it will evolve. This is probably the easiest it's going to get, I think, unfortunately, for the next 3 years.
It needs to make sense as well. Right? You need to think about the long-term solution, and perhaps translation can be the long-term solution. I've worked with a customer, not a payments bank. They do everything domestically. In terms of Swift payments, they have 3 to 4 a month.
Okay.
So for them, it doesn't make sense to invest hundreds of thousands or millions of euros into developing a new core banking system that's MX capable. It just doesn't make sense for them. So they have a simple translation that they're going to do, and that works. That works for them, and there's no need to adapt that. But it's a conscientious decision of, okay, this is both our short-term and our long-term solution.
And what you've just said there absolutely resonates with, there is not one solution for every bank.
Absolutely.
Every single financial institution is going to do something different. I have had 15, 20 different discussions of, what should you do with truncated data? Where should we place it? Supplementary data, we'll put it in another field, we'll put it in the header, we'll put it in the app header, we'll put it in an envelope. There is not just one solution for this.
Yep.
And it will all depend on what your current needs are, but there is still a solution at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And I strongly suggest you speak to a payment consultancy firm such as the person that's sitting opposite me, because it's those edge cases that will hurt at the end. Everyone's tested the easy stuff. It's the edge cases that you've got to think of, I think.
So I think maybe to summarize, we haven't done anything yet. What do we need to do? Step one, make sure that your connectivity is in order.
Yes.
So that means, actually the best place to start is Swift connectivity guidance, where we can look at what you need to do in terms of RMA provisioning, in terms of being ready to receive messages on Fin+. That's step one.
Yeah.
Step two is figure out how you're going to process MX messages. So look at what type of translation solution that you're going to use, whether it's Swift Inflow or something else. And then third step is figure out your testing. How are you going to test this? How are you going to identify all the edge cases? How are you going to make sure that this solution, if it's not watertight, it's close to watertight enough, and it's at least watertight where it needs to be, being your compliance and your sanction screening. And then step four, think about the long-term solution. And already, you can't do the short-term solution without thinking about the long-term solution and what that's going to look like. Is that an approach you agree with? Did I miss anything?
I was going to add an additional point of what markets you currently live in. It's not just CBPR+, it's not just Swift. It depends what region you're in. Am I making payments in South Africa? Do I need to worry about SAMOS? Do I need to worry about MEPs? Do I need chips, chaps? They're not all CBPR+ mappings. They are completely, they're
absolutely
like for like messages. Here's the message standard. Okay, how do I get there? And yes, most of it will be CBPR+, but there will be tweaks everywhere.
Yeah.
So November, yes, absolutely the same points. But going forward to that long-term solution, where are your markets? What different initiatives could you be hitting? And then can your solution cater for those as well? And I don't think the Swift Translation Service will be doing MEPs and SAMOS and everything. So there you've got those different points, and that's where we step in.
So that's a very important point that you're saying, right? So Swift's inflow translation and transaction manager only work for CBPR+ flows. So that means if it's a nostro-vostro relationship between two financial institutions, it doesn't work if we're looking at flows that are going over market infrastructure. So to your point, very concretely, it doesn't solve those problems. So if you're going to be integrating with a market infrastructure, and if you're going to be sending flows over market infrastructure, you need to find an in-house solution, or at least an on-premise solution, or outsource, but at least not rely on Swift to solve that problem for you.
For example, our CBPR+ library, every customer who has that library has always wanted to change it.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. I don't sell a black box solution. It doesn't work that way.
That's why I'm also quite a fan of Trace Financial's Transformer solution, because you can really adapt things and tweak them. And again, if you have people who are helping you identify these edge cases, you can adapt your transformations to be able to catch those edge cases and to avoid having them fall in repair or reduce your STP rates. So you already have a good number of libraries for a lot of clearings already, for a lot of use cases, and you can tweak them to your heart's desire.
That's the beauty of it. I mean, again, there's Transformer, there's other products on the market, but you need that flexibility to be able to say, right, here are my CBPR+ libraries. What am I going to do for Target 2? What am I going to do for MEPs? What am I going to do for chats, chaps, whatever? And the ability for either yourself to do it or to take a pre-built library, a Target 2 mapping library, a MEPS mapping library. And as I said, you've got to have that flexibility. The most common thing I get or question I have when we start demo, when we start talking, is that the mapping's coming out in MX and it's got a date of 9,999 as the year. I was like, yeah, it does. Well, aren't you going to change it? Well, no, that's what the rules tell you to do. The rules tell you to go to 9,999. So the first thing people do is like, I'll just take the date from the Swift message. That's a good idea. Maybe you want to do that. So you either have the ability to make those changes yourself and then maintain them in-house And as I said before, doing this in code is doable. I'm not saying it's not doable at all. I'm saying it is doable. It's just a lot more work if you're doing the maintenance as opposed to your vendor doing the maintenance. And that will save you a lot of time and a lot of money, I believe, in the long run.
Absolutely. And from a strategy perspective, it makes sense, right? Because simply your vendor is developing a mapping once that's then distributed to tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s of different customers. So you can split that cost over a much greater number of financial institutions than if you have to bear it all on your own.
And we're finding that when we work with companies like yourself, with the payments knowledge yourself, and you have a tool that you can then work in yourself, you're not writing a spec and then somebody's going off to develop it and then somebody's going off to test it. It's all within the same tool, and that's a key element, and that's why I bring people like Kjeld in when they start talking, because here is a library. Have a look at the edge cases because you may need to change this to fit your needs. We're going to wrap up soon. I would like to ask you a question about November. Let's say January. So November comes, everyone's happy, there's not one rejected message. We all live in this beautiful utopia. Come January 18th, what percentage of messages going over the Swift network will be in MX ISO 2822?
Interesting one.
Can't help myself.
So actually, before we started this recording, we had a discussion where you thought it was much lower than what was it that you said?
I'm going to take my Trace Financial hat off. I believe this is going to be around 13%, if that. That's my guess. I believe what will happen is most of the traffic will still be MT. There'll be a few big financial institutions who will be sending MX. They'll be orchestrated between the banks, and it will flow nicely. But I don't believe it will be the driving force.
And that's where I completely disagree.
Great.
I think around 80% of the flows as of November 2022 are going to be ISO based, or so somewhere close there. So again, a lot of banks won't be ready, and a lot of banks will still be MT based. However, there are some very large banks who are looking to go full ISO from day one, and a few of those banks. So if you get 10 of your 20 largest banks, that's already going to account for a very large portion of the volume. So I'm looking at 50 to 80%, somewhere in that range.
I'm sure next year when Payments Canada is in person in Toronto and we're going to do another talk, I'll mark the date, I'll find out somehow. If it's below 55%, I will buy you a drink. And if it's above, I buy you. Deal?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a good plan. Now, that being said, lots of MX messages. How many of them are going to have rich data? So structured data, structured addresses, ultimate debtor, ultimate creditor. Then I think we're talking about less than 1%.
I was about to say, how low?
That's going to be 13? Almost negligible. Right? Yeah, but an old colleague of mine, he actually had a bit of a problem with an apartment he just bought. In fact, his roof was leaky,
right?
A little bit leaky. And that's the thing. A leaky roof is a leaky roof. You don't need a lot of water to get in to cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing here, right? Even though it's less than 1% of messages that are going to be having structured data or this type of stuff that you're not anticipating for, if you're not catering to that 1% of messages, you're still going to get humidity. You're still going to get mold. You're still going to get damp. You're still going to have all these issues because a leaky roof is a leaky roof.
Yeah.
And even for that 1%, you need to make sure that you're not letting any sanctioned payments get through your systems.
Edge cases.
All right. So, Paul, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this talk again.
Always a pleasure.
This is a good tradition, so thank you very much.
Let's do this in person in Toronto. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you in person next year.